I think most of you know me. I think it's been almost this is my fourth Martin Luther King Community Breakfast as director of the library, and again, I'm honored to be here. But on behalf of the whole Rogers Memorial Library, I welcome you to the library's 13th annual Community Breakfast, where we have come together to celebrate the life and legacy of the late Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. In light of recent events in the news, it seems clear that events like ours are as important, if not more, than when we began this breakfast 13 years ago. I speak for the Board of Trustees and the staff when I say that the library is honored to host this breakfast, and we are so pleased that you have all joined us as we reflect on the work of the great Dr. King. I'd like to thank the programming department staff for their ever-diligent work on this event, made more challenging this year by some staffing shortages. The Library Board of Trustees continues to offer support and assistance for the breakfast, and I'd like to recognize, I think I saw Trustee Pat Finicaro. I think she was, scooping some eggs out there. Judy Johnson is in the audience, as well as former trustee Judith Costa, Larry Strickland, and I think that was it, but I was pouring coffee, so forgive me if I missed a few. I hope I didn't. And I also want to say a thank you to our local representatives who have joined us this morning. I see Bridget Fleming, I saw Christine Scalera, I believe Frank is here. Zappone is here. Did I miss anybody else again? Sorry, Stan Glink, I saw you back there, Stan. I did see Stan. So thank you all for making time. I know this is a busy morning for all of you across the island, so I appreciate you joining us and showing your support. So enough from me. Let's get on with the program. We have a great one in store for you today. This morning we are thrilled our speaker Bernice Sims accepted our invitation, and thank you to Trustee Judy Johnson for the suggestion. Shout out to Judy Johnson over there. Sherry Elder will be entertaining us with some of her beautiful music. And to start us all off, Father Mike Vitrone from the Basilica Parish of Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary right here in town will offer a blessing. I hope you all enjoyed your meal, and I thought I was going to be able to say there's lots left over. I think there is, but you folks put a really nice dent in our meal out there, so maybe we got the amounts right this year. So thank you all, and Father Mike, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a great breakfast, isn't it? It's wonderful. I'm really honored to be here today with you for a little bit this morning, and especially to listen to our main speaker today, Bernice. We were just talking a little bit before, and I think it is true that this is a kind of a special year with the events in our country. It's more important than ever that the dream of Dr. King be uplifted and affirmed and lived out by people. And I can remember, just on a personal note, that being a child of the 60s, I just thought Dr. King was one of the most inspirational people, and certainly had a lot to do with my outlook on the world and my outlook on faith, my outlook on religion. And after I did my graduate work and became a teacher of moral theology, I would never, ever think of letting a student escape my class without a careful reading of the letter from a Birmingham jail, which is probably one of the most important moral arguments for people of faith in our lifetimes, for sure. I heard a story. I think it's true, and it kind of seemed important to me that that wonderful inspirational speech on the Great Mall of the United States Capitol in Washington in front of the Lincoln Memorial, the "I Have a Dream" speech, that actually that day Dr. King, when he was speaking, had a prepared text, and obviously in light of the occasion, very carefully argued, and he was a doctoral person. He obviously had a very careful text and a lot of very poignant things to say, and that somewhere near the end of his speech, the I Have a Dream section was actually not part of the remarks he prepared. But it was, at least according to the legend, Michaelia Jackson, who's somewhere in the crowd behind him, said loud enough for him to hear, "Tell them your dream. Tell them the story about your dream." And somehow between the inspiration of Michaelia and I think even more so the inspiration of God, Martin began to speak off the text and from his heart words that to this day have touched the nation and the world, but words that are still a dream that is not only behind us in our memories, but very much before us. And in that spirit, let us pray today. Loving God, we give you thanks and we give you praise for the blessing of the life of Martin Luther King Jr. We thank you for the dream that you bestowed on him, a dream of his own experience and of his own heart, but also a dream of your heart, the heart of God, the will of God for all people to be one, to celebrate their life together. We thank you that that dream is so deeply ingrained in the heart of our nation that is among those truths that we dare to call self-evident, needing no argument, needing no explanation. And so may that self-evident truth become more evident in our life and living. We ask your healing and your blessing and your mercy on the places in our world and the places in each of us that find that self-evident truth hard to live with and hard to accept and hard to will for others. We ask you to help us to grow, become more committed to the dream. May the dream be celebrated not only in the past but in the future. May it be in our own hearts and in our own minds. May it be a dream that we pass on to our friends, our communities, and especially our children. And so may our God bless our being here together, blessing our memories, our work, and our future. Let us say together, amen. Amen. Thank you, Penny.
Thank you, Father Mike, for that beautiful prayer. My name is Penny Wright. I know most of you, as you may or may not know, this is one of my favorite events every year. We're so pleased to be able to have our Martin Luther King breakfast. And we'd like to let you know that Sherry Elder is back this year to sing for us. Sherry is a singer-songwriter and musician whose work is influenced by old school pop and rhythm and blues with a classical contemporary flair. At the age of 6, she entered the East End Art School to study piano, and after graduating from the West Hampton Beach High School, went on to receive her BFA in Arts Management with a concentration in music and broadcasting. Sherry has been heavily involved in music and theater production, as well as hosting various community events. She told me this morning that she is the proud composer of the jingle for the Hampton Coffee Company, which can be heard on 3 radio stations. She, last year, was the soloist at the Hampton Classic. She sang the national anthem. And she will be doing her first official concert at Guildhall on February 3rd called Songs from the Heart. So we're very happy to please welcome Sherry Elder.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today. This song that I'm going to play for you is an original song that I wrote. It's called Love. And I just felt like it was appropriate for the times that we're in. And it's just about loving your neighbors and everyone you meet and just how a smile can cheer a day. So here's Love. Ooh. doesn't envy or boast at any time. Real love's a perfect gift, full of truth and happiness, wrapped up in a package for you and I to share, to share. Ooh, 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 ooh. It's a simple hello that makes us smile. It's many I love yous over time. It lifts you up when you're down, makes you feel good inside and out. It's a kind word or a gesture, helping hand, there's nothing better. Ooh.
Thank you very much, Sherry's. That was beautiful. Every year we are debating back and forth who we may be able to invite to come to speak at this event. And we were really fortunate this year that one of our trustees, Judy Johnson, as Liz mentioned, suggested today's speaker, Bernice Sims. I'll tell you a little bit about her. She is a licensed clinical social worker. She's a veteran of the civil rights movement, having been an active member of the NAACP, COFO, and CORE since she was a teenager in the early 1960s. Bernice later left Mississippi and moved to New York, where she graduated from Adelphi University and then went on to become a social worker. Bernice Sims was elected the first African-American female to serve as councilperson on Long Island and to serve as a trustee of Hempstead Village. She also served on the advisory board for former New York Governor Mario Cuomo. Additionally, she contributed to the art community as a SAG actor, a visual artist, and as a writer. Detour Before Midnight is her personal account of the last few hours she and her family spent with Mississippi burning civil rights workers before they were abducted and murdered by the Ku Klux Klan on June 21st, 1964. This book is a wonderful book, and I hope you will find time to read it. We have it in our library, and it's an honor to have Bernice Sims here today. Please welcome Bernice Sims.
Thank you so much, Penny. Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. And thank you for being here. Can you hear me okay? Okay. You know, I'm going to try to answer a few questions that I get. But first of all, I'm going to show you this 10-minute presentation that was put together. It's going to kind of take you down memory lane a bit. You will see some very old pictures here. You will see some eventually of me in the Freedom School from 1964. I swear, I think I look older there than I do now, but that's just my personal opinion. You'll see some of my siblings that attended the Freedom School every day. You can push play. You will hear some songs. We were very much moved in the 60s by the sound of Motown, the sound of Peter, Paul, and Mary, Pete Seeger, folk songs, and the Motown kind of carried us through some very difficult times. So I'm going to let you look at this, and you'll see some photographs. You will see the house that they left. It's still there in Meridian, Mississippi, where the 3 civil rights workers left my home. The porch is kind of enclosed now, but you will see that home. It will be identified, and some other pictures that you might recognize.
I got it.
That picture represents the reunion in 2014 in June. I went back to Mississippi to participate in the 50th anniversary, and there was some students that are still in the Freedom Schools, and they were sharing with us what they're doing now, and they had a special thank you presentation to us, so that of Tears for the Tears, that you saw them embracing us and saying thank you.
Well, boys, you've done a good job. You struck a blow for the white man. Mississippi can be proud of you. You let those agitating outsiders know where this state stands. Now go home and forget it.
I'll stop it there. You probably get a chance to see the house. the home, which is still there. I call it the Detour Home. The title of my book is Detour Before Midnight, and I named it that because the three, as you recognize them as the Mississippi Burning Three, James Chaney, who was my next-door neighbor, Michael Swerner, and Andy Goodman stopped at my home. They made an unscheduled stop. They came by my home to get my brother, who cut all of the freedom workers' hair because they were barbers. They could cut anybody's hair. It was Father's Day. He had too many heads to cut, and Mickey asked him to go along with them. They were going to investigate the burning of the church that was going to be used for a voter registration site about 37 miles away in Longdale, Philadelphia, Mississippi, or Neshoba County. He asked them to come back later because he had so many heads to cut. If they could come back later, he would go with them. One or two of my brothers, because they had been active in the movement even before Freedom Summer, along with myself. They said they were already off schedule when they came by our home, so that was the reason they couldn't wait for my brother. So actually, they went on alone. But because I was always involved in the missions with them prior to Freedom Summer, even as far back as 62 and 63, I asked to go along with them. I had a big argument with Michael Swerner. I call him Mickey. He was from, as you know, from New York. Michael Swerner and Andy Goodman had family, and they attended Queens College. I asked to go along with them. I fought with him, and he said it wouldn't be a good, proper place for a girl to go. And in those days, girls weren't wearing pants. So he said, there's going to be a lot of burnt rubbish that we have to, go over, and it wouldn't be a proper place for you to go. The reason I thought I could go with them, I always went with them. I started out in the movement early on, and many people asked me why. There were three factors. One being that I think it had to do with my birth order. I was in the middle of 4 boys, so I was constantly having to fight for my place. My religious upbringing, as well as when I went to school, I became very patriotic. I don't know how many of you were product of the 60s. I know many of you are too young for that, but some of you might be able to identify with it. We were very patriotic at that time. We believed in everything that we heard. We had a lot of songs and praise and lyrics that influenced us. We heard things, when I went to school, we heard things like, well, first of all, I mentioned my relationship with God, because we always heard that God loved everybody, black, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. So I knew that God loved everybody and he didn't make any mistakes. When I went to school, I learned about our Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We had the songs, America the Beautiful, how much we love America the Beautiful. We had songs like the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem. And when I learned about in school the conditions in which Francis Scott Key wrote those during, it was Fort McHenry fight, the War of 1812, he didn't know when he talked about bombs bursting in air, he didn't know whether or not he was going to get out alive. So those words were meaningful for me. I just knew I was so patriotic. I love America. Every morning, I don't know about you, there was a flag in the corner somewhere, and what did we do? We put our hands over our hearts, or some people did this, and we pledged, and we said, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. How many of you know that? You still know it? Okay, say it with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For all, that meant everybody, all. I believe that. And when I learned about our, the 3 levels of government, we had the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branch, I thought, well, there's no more perfect system than that. We had this check and balance system, and I was just so full of it. I tell you, and I went around and I was so happy, as we all are, and I still am, to be an American. I've never thought of myself as anything but an American. I never thought of myself but anything other than America. I love this country. I still love this country. So you can imagine, I became a kind of confused child. When I started going around, I was brought up in Meridian, Mississippi, segregated Jim Crow South. When I saw the water fountains, colored only, white only, I saw it in the restaurants, in the in the, you know, the bus terminals, in the train station, one of my favorite places to be. And I saw the water fountain it was a little small one, and usually it was rusty, and the water was not very, it was warm, and it had an unsteady beat. And I had to, even as a small child, I had to bend over to drink from that water fountain. And then right next to it was this roaring, monotonous sound of this silver. It was always a silver encased water fountain next to it that said white for whites. And I drank from it. You know, I know it was cool because many times my mother turned her back or anything. I always drink from it, so I always knew that was a cooler, better water. You know, I think that when I start hearing about Rosa Parks and the four that integrated the counters in North Carolina, I thought in the buses, and we had to sit on the back of the bus, or we had this delineation line. It was a white line on the bus. I think I tried to integrate the whole state of Mississippi by myself. One day and I talk about it in the book, one day I got on the bus and we were this line, and I said, I absolutely refuse. I refuse to get on that line. I moved to the front of the bus. The bus driver, I tell you, you have to read about it in my book, that particular experience I had that day. But I ended up acquiescing. I refused to go to the back, and I was getting pressure from the African-American people who I realized were frightened. After a period of time, I realized was fear. They were fear for themselves and me. I acquiesced by sitting in midways. I refused to go to the back of the bird. I heard about Rosa Parks and what she did and how successful those boycotts had been. So I was willing to do anything. So I had been working with Medgar Evers from Meridian to Jackson. That was about 93 miles apart. We were kids in the NAACP. We got involved, first of all, through our church. We got involved with early sing-ins. We protested. We stood outside of electric companies and telephone companies. We thought they should have hired black people. This was a big focus of Medgar Evers. I worked with him from like part of 62 to 63. We had this exchange. He was a leader, was a field director in Mississippi, and my person, the co-leader, lived in Meridian, so we had a lot of exchange with the kids there. And on the day I first heard about the Freedom Summer was at Medgar Evers' church. It was something called, we had a rally, and I heard them talking about what they were going to be coming to do in order to help us, and there were things we had been involved in, voters registration. We got doors slammed in our faces, but we were teenagers, who cares? You know, one person slammed a door, we'd go to another. We didn't have the sense enough to be upset about that, because we were trying to get that freedom vote that I talk about in my book, and I knew about that and I understood that early on. So when one door closed, another one opened, so we just kept going. And it wasn't until I realized years later and doing my investigation and my research that I was in his home eating fried chicken, peas and carrots, and Jell-O with fruit cocktail in it as dessert, fed to me by Marilee Evers, his wife, and I was there a few weeks before he was killed. He was killed June 12, 1963, and I had been in his home earlier. And when I heard but at his church, I heard about the Freedom Summer in '64, I thought, well, my goodness, that's the cavalry. We're getting someone to come and help us do what we were doing already. So actually, that was actually a very sad moment when he was killed. And I said, you know, I was just in his home. And then, I think a couple of months later, it was August of '63, Martin Luther King came. He spoke at the March on Washington, and I tell you, all of our spirits was lifted. I know if you were living at the times you were. And I want to let you know that Michael Swerner, Mickey, I call him, he was so moved. That was one of the things that inspired him to want to come to Mississippi and be involved in the movement. He took a bunch of kids from New York, and he took them to the March on Washington, a whole bunch of kids that he had been working with. He was a social worker as well, working on the Lower East Side. And part of his letter, he wrote why he wanted to be involved, because he was so inspired by Martin Luther King. So Martin Luther King was inspiring people for a long time. And so we heard about, that was an uplift. Then the next thing that happened was about 3 weeks later in Birmingham, the church was bombed in Birmingham, and 4 little girls, and that was very upsetting to all of us. And then 2 months later, And this was these emotional and psychological assaults that we felt. That was in June. We had August, the March on Washington. September, we had the 4 little girls that were bombed. And now September, 2 months later, November 22nd, 1963, you know what happened. J.F. Kennedy was shot. I was at school. And because I had been involved in the movement, I didn't know why, but I was sequestered in a classroom, in the back of a classroom, practically all day long. I didn't understand why I was sequestered. I saw a room away from the principal's office that I'd never seen before, the door open up. But after a period of time, I began to see other kids rolled into that room, and they were kids that I had been involved with in the movement. So I said, well, maybe we did something wrong. We were harassed on my campus because we ascribed to the tenets of Martin Luther King of nonviolence. And some of the kids thought we were crazy, but we ascribed to that. And everyone who was involved in the movement from Martin Luther King's nonviolence. So we were picked on, and when we were all taken in the classroom, they assumed we had done something wrong and said, that's those civil rights fighters. That's how we were referred to as teenagers. I later discovered that the principal, who we thought were kind of unfeeling, he did that to protect us because when Kennedy was killed, he knew more about our activities than we realized. We thought we were doing this secretly and on the weekends. He feared for us, and he kept us in the room until our parents or someone he could reach to take us home. And when they couldn't find anyone, we got special escorts that particular day. It was a safety measure. And in my town, there were whistles. They had a parade. They were celebrating all over town when John F. Kennedy was killed. So it was a reason to be concerned. So I just wanted to say, my time is probably running a little short here. I wanted to just end with, so that gives you some idea how I got involved. I don't know if the movement came to me or I was waiting for the movement. I had been involved before Freedom Summer. And the day that Mickey, Andy, and James Chaney, I call him J.E., he was my next door neighbor for about 15 years. We were inducted into the, Michael Swerner had gotten us involved in the Freedom Summer, but we had been involved before. And I didn't know it. I thought it was a coincidence that he selected about 12 of us. But the 12 of us had been involved before, and they knew we were activists. We were activists. We were already doing the work. We were doing the pioneer work. So it wasn't a coincidence that we got involved. And we met Michael Swerner. He came down to Mississippi in January of '64. So we had an opportunity to really form a relationship with him. And as I said, I went on several missions with him. He had a special relationship with my mother that I talk about in the book because they used to argue about religion a lot. She did not understand when he said he was agnostic. She thought he meant that he was atheist. And she could not understand him being an agnostic, not believing in God. And we tried to explain that to her. And she thought, well, the day that he did something very special on the day that he died that I talk about in the book, and we didn't know whether he was kidding or not, but my mother was convinced that he had accepted Christ. And I said, Mother, but he's Jewish. You have to understand the difference in religion. But she was satisfied that all that work she had been doing for all of those months and all that food she was feeding him, and it was the macaroni cheese and the fried chicken, and that it had worked somehow. So she was happy in knowing that she had converted him. And I recently spoke to his wife, Rita Swerner, this summer during the Freedom Summer, and she wanted me to write about it for a long time. And she finally read about that day, and she said, oh, I never knew about Mickey's conversion. So, you know, it was difficult because every time I tried for a long time, I wrote about it, it was always going back and I was feeling the pain again. But at some point I realized that, you know, to play testimony to them and who they were, a living testimony, I had to tell the story of how they lived. Not just the Mississippi burning story, I had to tell my own story. And they needed to be remembered for the humans that they were, the human beings that saw something wrong in a system so young, 20, 21, and 22, and they wanted to give up their lives, use their own finances, and come to Mississippi and do something about it. They were inspired by the person that we are honoring today, Martin Luther King. And I'll end with this. a few quotes from Martin Luther King, some coming from that Birmingham jail. He said, injustice, you probably heard this before, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Thank you. And I did want to add one thing. I'm competing with Amazon. I have some flyers. I do have the book. I send it, mail it to people from their home. I have some here. The price of the book is $16. I will send it. I have cards. You can get it from me. I take cash and checks, and if you would like to purchase some, I have quite a few with me today. So Amazon will not sign it. You will not get a signed, personalized copy. You'll only get that from me. Thank you very much. My commercial announcement.
Thank you, Bernice Sims. I think you are an inspiration for all of us. And I'm not sure we're going to let you off the hook without coming back another year. Okay, so now is the time that we're all going to do a little singing together. We're going to sing 2 songs to close today's breakfast. The first, and Sherry Elder will play a little introduction, and then we will sing the Lift Every Voice and Sing. And should we stand up or sit down? Okay, everyone stand up. We're going to sing this, and then we will all sing We Shall Overcome. So we'll go right in from this song to We Shall Overcome, and then we can maybe hold hands and walk around a little bit. So you want to get us started, Sherry, for this song?
Out when the gloom
Okay, find a hand.
Maybe we should get in front of this.
We'll walk hand in hand. We shall live in peace. We're not alone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the morning. It was a wonderful speaker. Thank you to everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.